Hey everyone, welcome back to Dollar Games, and today I'll be diving into my review of Final Fantasy Tactics: The Ivalice Chronicles. First, I want to give a big thank you to Square Enix for sending me a review code for this game. I really appreciate it, and it gave me the time I needed to put this video together before the game's release. Before we jump in though, I also want to say how much I appreciate all of your support. And if you're watching this and aren't subscribed yet, I'd love it if you'd hit that subscribe button down below here, yes. And while you're at it, drop a like and leave a comment. Really helps me get swept away in the arms of the algorithm. So please help me reach that sweet, sweet embrace. Anyway, you're here to hear about Final Fantasy Tactics: The Ivalice Chronicles and whether or not the game holds up. Let me preface this review with a little spoiler. It's wonderful. Honestly, this might be one of the most definitive ways to play it for most people. And I stress most people here because I know there will always be purists who swear by the PSP version, but I'll get into that later in the review. To start things off, let me paint a picture. Much like how the art direction of this game paints one. I've been a huge fan of Final Fantasy ever since I played it on the NES as a kid, where the high fantasy worlds, progression systems, and the grind to grow stronger resonated with me against the platformers of that era, sparking a lifelong love for JRPGs that I didn't even realize at the time. I carried that love through the SNES and into the PS1 era, but tactics games weren't really on my radar. I played Western RTS titles like Command & Conquer or Age of Empires, but never really touched JRPG-flavored tactics games like, let's say, Shining Force. That all changed when Square announced Final Fantasy Tactics for the PS1 back in 1997, and I still remember talking about it with my friends and being hyped to pick it up. The game lived up to every expectation, offering a rich story, deep mechanics, and endless options for strategy through its job system. Though I'll admit, it was definitely tough. My first tactics game had me getting my butt kicked constantly, but that was part of the fun. We had time to grind jobs, retry battles, and slowly figure it out, and it left a lasting impact that the PSP release, The War of the Lions, only reinforced years later. So when I heard about this remaster, and let's be real, we've all been waiting since the Nvidia leak, I was incredibly excited, but also cautious. Now let's get into the story. So in terms of story, I don't want to spoil anything for you guys. I'm going to keep it vague on purpose. So at its core, Final Fantasy Tactics tells a tale that feels more like a historical chronicle than a typical JRPG storyline. The game is framed like you're reading through a historical journal, recounting the rise and fall of kingdoms, the shifting tides of noble houses, and the unseen forces pulling strings from the shadows. Rather than being a straightforward good versus evil adventure, it's a layered narrative about politics, faith, loyalty, and betrayal, all painted with this medieval Shakespearean flair. You follow Ramza, a young noble who becomes entangled in the brutal war of succession, and through his eyes you see how corrupt families torn apart and ordinary people swept up in struggles far beyond their control, which honestly is a timeless story that can resonate with any generation of people playing this game. Now let's get into the presentation. Like I mentioned in my PAX preview video, I'm always weary of how these remasters handle modernizing graphics and presentation. Sometimes it works, and honestly, sometimes it really doesn't. With that in mind, I want to be clear in saying the art design and graphical upgrades of this remaster, in my opinion, are wonderful. My worry of having high-res backgrounds with smoothed out character sprites and an end result that looks like a blurry, smudged up painting tossed onto an N64 filter was finally laid to rest. Thankfully, Final Fantasy Tactics doesn't fall into this trap. Instead, the developers honed in on the heart of how the game was originally presented. Final Fantasy Tactics as a whole reads like a Shakespearean novel, and between the story beats and the dialogue structure, it carries a strong medieval flair. Every section of the game feels like a miniature set piece, as if it's been dropped onto the page of a storybook or journal. That idea comes from the limitations of the PS1, but as they say, limitation breeds creativity. This remaster embraces that same philosophy, adjusting the graphics to give the game an almost sketched look, like drawings on a journal, while keeping both the characters and environments consistent and stylish. The result is a look that's sharp enough for modern displays, but timeless enough to age gracefully. What also stands out to me is how well the remaster balances nostalgia with modern clarity. The PS1 release had a foggy, dreamlike haze that worked for atmosphere, but also obscured details. Here, the developers preserved the mood while cleaning it up. so you can actually admire the designs of armor, the architecture of castles, and the subtle touches of the environment without losing that storybook effect. It's a smart choice because it doesn't reinvent the wheel or modernize the game into something unrecognizable. Instead, it leans into the identity Final Fantasy Tactics already had, polishing it just enough so both longtime fans and newcomers can enjoy a version that feels faithful and timeless. Another highlight of the presentation is how cutscenes and dialogue are delivered, thanks to the addition of new voice work.
Beautiful, isn't it? Do you think Teacher might be watching this same sunset?
Don't worry, Delita. I'm sure she is well.
On PS1, story moments relied on text boxes and portraits, which had their charm but sometimes felt distant. The PSP's War of the Lions added beautifully animated cutscenes, but this remaster takes that foundation further by layering in voice acting. Hearing Ramza, Delita, and the rest of the cast brought to life adds emotional weight that text alone could not capture. The cadence of the performances match the medieval tone of the writing, so nothing feels forced. It's a natural extension of the world. The best part is that the voice work doesn't overshadow the script. Instead, it enhances the nuances of political debates, rivalries, and personal struggles while still letting the prose shine. For longtime fans, it's surreal to hear those lines spoken aloud after all these years, and for newcomers, it makes the story far easier to follow. It's a thoughtful addition that perfectly matches the philosophy of this remaster, which is polish what's already great without rewriting history. Now let's get into the gameplay. Well, Final Fantasy Tactics was already in a league of its own back in 1997, and this remaster doesn't try to reinvent what wasn't broken. It just makes it smoother and more enjoyable to play today. The core of the job system, the tactical grid-based battles, and the freedom to mix and match abilities all remain untouched, which is exactly what you want from a game that built its reputation on deep customization and replayability. What's different here are the enhancements that make the experience feel less old school and more like a modern tactics game. One of the most immediate improvements come from the widescreen presentation. In the original PS1 release, your battle HUD was cramped, often making you have to pull up menus and scroll through them to get information that you needed. Now the extra screen real estate gives you more room to see unit stats, turn order, and battlefield conditions at a glance. It might sound like something small, but in a tactics game where every move matters, being able to read the field more clearly without digging through menus is a game changer. Combined with sharper visuals, you get a clearer sense of positioning, range, and flow, which helps battles feel both faster and strategic. Another noticeable upgrade is how fluid the interface feels compared to the original. Menus respond quickly, targeting enemies or allies is more intuitive, and the camera moves with more precision, making it easier to survey the battlefield. These refinements remove some of the clunkiness that players might have remembered from the PS1 version while keeping the depth intact. Add in small touches like streamlined animations and improved readability of abilities, and the game respects your time without ever dumbing things down. You're also given the option to fast forward in this game, which helps speed up battles by letting you skip through enemy turns. This is great because those turns can sometimes feel painfully slow. One gripe I had with this feature though is that during my playthrough, I often ended up accidentally fast forwarding through dialogue sequences that pop up in the middle of battles. I'd already be holding down the fast forward button to breeze through enemy actions, and then suddenly an important story beat would appear, and I'd miss it completely. That's definitely frustrating since there's no way to rewind and catch what was said. It's a small complaint overall, but worth pointing out. So when you're using fast forward, just be careful. The end result is that the remake preserves the punishing but rewarding gameplay that made Final Fantasy Tactics legendary, while trimming away some of the rough edges that came from the hardware limitations. It plays exactly how you remember in your head, but with a clarity and ease of use that makes returning to Ivalice more welcoming than ever. For newcomers, it feels accessible without being simplified, and for veterans, it feels like the definitive way to experience the game's strategic brilliance. Now, as for the combat, in Final Fantasy Tactics, it's still the heart of the experience, and this remaster makes it as addictive as ever. Battles play out on grid-based maps where positioning, terrain, and unit abilities all matter, and every decision carries weight. The depth of this job system means you're constantly experimenting, mixing skills, unlocking new jobs, and fine-tuning your party until it feels like an extension of your own strategy. That sense of freedom is what makes the combat so timeless, and why it still stands tall amongst tactics games today. But for me, One of the most enjoyable parts has always been the grind. I know for some players, grinding is a dirty word, but here it feels like progress in the purest form. There's something satisfying about throwing yourself into random battles, building up your job points, and watching characters evolve into absolute powerhouses. I actually found myself so hooked that I spent time grinding on my Steam Deck while walking on the treadmill, and thankfully, it didn't end with me face planting. The portability of that game makes the grind even more natural. It's proof that even after all these years, the core loop of Final Fantasy Tactics combat isn't just strategic, it's genuinely fun to lose hours to. Lastly, for the combat, I want to mention the difficulty settings. I played on the base difficulty, which is definitely easier than the original, but you can bump it up to the highest setting if you're looking for that classic challenge, or lower it if you just need a little help getting through some fights or want to grind without too much resistance. I did try the easier mode and it still has its challenges, but nothing so overwhelming that it takes away from the experience. So don't worry. So one of the biggest new features in Ivalice Chronicles is fittingly the Chronicle system. This edition acts almost like a living history book of your playthrough, cataloging key events, battles, characters, and story beats as you progress. It feels like you're building your own archive of Ivalice, page by page, and it ties perfectly into the medieval chronicle framing of the game's narrative. What makes this so effective is how it not only serves as a recap tool, but also as a way to appreciate the scope of the story. Final Fantasy Tactics can be dense, let's be real. Political intrigue, shifting alliances, and a large cast of characters, and having this record of reference helps you keep track of the who's who and what's happening without breaking any real immersion. It's more than just a story recap though. The Chronicles feature also logs gameplay details from jobs and abilities unlocked to major battles completed, giving you a sense of progression beyond what you see on the battlefield. It almost feels like Ramza's own war journal, which really fits how the game is designed. A chronicle of victories, defeats, and pivotal turning points that shape the narrative. For newcomers, it makes the game far more approachable since you no longer have to rely solely on memory or external guides for following along with the story. For veterans, it adds a fresh layer of appreciation, almost like you're experiencing the game not only as a player, but as a historian looking back at the War of the Lions. It's a thoughtful addition that respects the legacy of the original, while giving modern players a richer, more organized way to engage with the tale of Ivalice. So after everything is said and done, is this the definitive version of Final Fantasy Tactics? Can you finally put away your old copies of the PS1 original or War of the Lions on the PSP? The answer is a little complicated, and I'd honestly say yes and no depending on who you are and what you loved about the originals. At the end of the day, nostalgia is a powerful thing. The PS1 version has a heavy pull, and even though the Ivalice Chronicles includes the original mode as an option, many players will always prefer experiencing it on original hardware. For those players, that's their definitive version because nostalgia is a heavy drug. On the other hand, fans of the PSP release may feel like the remaster is missing key elements they loved. Extra job and classes like Onion Knight and Dark Knight, bonus story missions and side content, the multiplayer mode, and the expanded roster of characters including Balthier from Final Fantasy XII are unfortunately absent. So if you're a purist for the PSP version, you'll still want to hold on to your copy. But outside of that, this remaster is an almost perfect representation of the base experience with thoughtful modern touches. For newcomers, this is now the best and most creative way to dive into the game, staying true to its spirit while elevating it with additions like full voice acting and the Chronicles feature. For veterans, it's a chance to return to Ivalice and experience the game in its strongest form yet. The upgrades to presentation, gameplay, and combat will remind you exactly why you poured so many hours into it back in the day. And with the Chronicles system helping highlight the nuances of the story, you may even come away with a deeper understanding of the narrative than you ever had as a kid. At the end of the day, the Ivalice Chronicles may not replace every version of Final Fantasy Tactics, but it stands as the best way for most people to experience one of the greatest strategy RPGs ever made. Whether you're stepping into Ivalice for the first time or returning after decades, this is the version worthy of your time. And if you love this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.